Events like this aren't common, but they do happen. The working theory is alien abduction. In June of 2013, 65-year-old Ray Salmon, an experienced outdoorsman, went camping off the coast of beautiful Harrison Lake in British Columbia, Canada. He'd been there before. In fact, he'd been coming to the same lake for 20 years, so he knew the area like the back of his hand, and he was well prepared for any of the dangers he might face. But he was never seen again. When the Royal Canadian Mounted Police began their investigation, they found Ray's camper locked with his 2 dogs inside. The dogs were there to accompany him, so it doesn't make any sense why he'd leave them inside his camper, unless it was to protect them from something, some sort of danger. But what kind of danger are we talking about? A search and rescue team was called in, along with fully armed emergency response team members. Now, the ERT is a division of the RCMP called in when there is an expectation of extreme danger. These men come equipped with fully automatic rifles and body armor. That's not the type of response that you'd expect for a missing person. And in 3 separate locations, investigators found Ray's belongings. First, his camp. Then 400 yards north of that, on the shore of the lake, they found some clothes neatly folded along with a rifle. But then, on a mountain, in a meadow, way farther away, they found one of Ray's pistols. Why was he leaving weapons in random spots? Well, at least these 3 locations will help the search and rescue find him, right? Nope. Not only did they not find any tracks, but the dogs never even picked up a scent. We still don't know what happened to Ray, and we may never know, since soon after it began, the RCMP declared the area unsearchable, and they canceled the investigation. The official report says that he was injured and entered the water, where he drowned. Yeah, if you ask me, it seems like they're feeding us an answer just to shut us up, since the lack of one draws too much attention. Now, I don't know about you, but that only makes me more curious. So, I want you to imagine something. Imagine this. It's 1974. You're a hunter, and you're creeping through the forests of Wyoming's Medicine Bow National Forest when you spot a herd of elk. As you approach, you're a little too focused on your prey and you step on a branch. It cracks, and the noise echoes through the forest. Now, normally this would alert the elk and they'd run away, but not this time. In fact, the elk haven't responded. It seems like they're not moving at all. So you raise your rifle, you line up your shot, and you take it. The bullet flies from the barrel before stopping and falling to the ground like it just hit a steel wall. Only there's nothing there. You reach out and pick up the bullet to find that it's been totally flattened. Freaked out, you decide to leave, but before you can, you hear a voice. You turn around to find a strange man, and he just asks you how you're doing, so you tell him you're fine. What else are you gonna say? The man introduces himself as also one. He doesn't look quite human, more like someone tried to make a crude parody of a human. He actually makes you sick just by his appearance alone. You have to look away because the fear you feel is so intense that you think you might throw up. Then you realize that behind him there's a transparent cube hovering silently in between the trees. He asks you to come with him, and then you black out. This is the story of Carl Higdon, and according to him, it really happened. Carl wakes up inside the UFO and claims to have seen that same herd of elk, the one that he shot at, on board the UFO with him. Also, one turns and says that he eats the elk, that he visits Earth frequently to collect food. Eventually, after some interaction, he turns to Carl and explains that Carl's not needed, that he's of no use, so Carl is released. This isn't the only time that there have been reports of UFOs pursuing elk. In 1999, a team of forestry workers in Washington state claimed to have witnessed the abduction of an elk by a UFO.
As the object appeared to increase its altitude, the elk, which was suspended upright below the disc, rotated slowly beneath it and appeared to be getting closer to the central surface of the disc, at which point it reversed its course and proceeded to the west.
Later on, the elk was recovered.
We found a dead elk 2 miles or so from the site. However, there were no mutilation marks discernible, no gunshot wounds found, and no broken bones from a fall. The large female elk appeared healthy, albeit dead. We were on the site 8 days after the event. No scavengers had attacked the elk body.
What's interesting to me is that this elk was also found to have chronic wasting disease, also known as CWD. Now, CWD is a prion disease that affects the neurological systems of affected animals. It affects deer, moose, and elk. It's sometimes called the zombie deer disease, and it's 100% fatal. CWD also happens to affect a significant number of elk in Wyoming. Now, that's an interesting detail, and it gives you something to think about. But if UFOs and elk had a real connection, there'd be a stronger link, right? Maybe more cases. Well, there's more. Mark Strittmatter was 44 years old when he went missing from the Medicine Bow National Forest on October 19th, 2019. Mark was a 15-year big game outfitter and an experienced outdoorsman. According to his girlfriend, he'd been hunting his whole life. He loved the outdoors and he knew how to carry himself in the wilderness. He went missing just before a snowstorm, but search and rescue teams found no tracks. That's impossible. You can't be walking around in the snow and not leave tracks. Dogs were also not able to pick up any scent trail. If an animal had got him, there'd be some sign of that. Blood, scraps of clothing, not to mention a scent trail, but none of that existed. Additionally, if there was a body, there should be scavengers. Birds usually find a body long before a search and rescue team would, but there were no birds. Here's where it gets really strange though. Mark's remains were found in October of 2022, less than a quarter of a mile away from areas that had already been searched. How could he just vanish without a trace and then be found 3 years later in an area that had been searched by dogs? If he had died there, where were the scavengers? Why was there no scent? And if his body was deposited there after the fact, wouldn't there at least be signs of him moving around through the area? And as an experienced outdoorsman, wouldn't he have known the best thing to do when lost is to just sit and wait for someone to find you? So then how wasn't he found? No matter how you cut it, this disappearance just doesn't make any sense. But then again, when you look at the area, overlaid with a map showing the spread of CWD, the Medicine Bow National Forest is a hotspot of the epidemic. The same type of disappearance also happened to Charles Gustafson on October of 2006. Charles was also an experienced hunter with military survival training. He had a trail GPS, a compass, food, and water. His rifle and pack were recovered, but he was never found. Same as the previous case, no scent trail was ever picked up by search and rescue dogs. So that gives us 2 disappearances within the same forest, and if we're going to believe Carl's story, suddenly the lack of evidence starts to make some sense. There was no scent trail and there were no tracks because these men just got lifted into a UFO. Carl claims to have been abducted on October 25th. Mark went missing on October 19th, and Charles disappeared on October 11th. All the missing men, including Ray, were experienced outdoorsmen, all of them gone without a trace. Carl, Mark, and Charles were within the Medicine Bow National Forest, which is an area heavily affected by the spread of CWD. Again, if we believe Carl's story, we also know that the UFOs have an interest in the elk for some reason. The forestry workers in Washington also reported the abduction of an elk, the body of which was later found to be infected with CWD. By the way, UFO sightings have been reported by the military personnel of the nearby Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming since 1955. I hope that the gears in your head are starting to turn and you're starting to see the patterns here, because if you ask me, these are some really strange coincidences, and I don't know about you guys, but I don't really believe in coincidences. This theory, right? It's just a theory. This theory about UFO abductions as an explanation for these disappearances is interesting. And while I personally do love a good UFO theory, we have to think about this. How much of it is actually true? Well, for one, all of the disappearances that I've mentioned are documented and factual. I just want to get that out of the way. These people really did go missing. But the circumstances surrounding their disappearances are not always so cut and dry as to suggest aliens, at least in the case of Ray Salmon. Investigators had ruled out foul play, but according to his brother, he had run into trouble in the area before.
A few years ago, people were shooting semi-automatic rifles up here, and they threatened to take his boat and everything else. He ended up staying awake in the bush all night with his gun.
Now, does this mean that he was attacked by thieves? Of course not. It doesn't mean that. But if we're going to jump to aliens, we should at least stop to consider the more reasonable alternatives. According to investigators, Ray fired 6 shots before disappearing. 3 of those struck nearby property, 2 in the side of a local's camper, and 1 in the headlight of a Nissan Pathfinder. That leaves 3 shots remaining, and if he fired those 3 shots into the air like we believe that he did, that's a sign of SOS among hunters. That doesn't really tell us anything except that he was in trouble. But suddenly, the arrival of the emergency response team makes more sense. Someone probably thought that someone was trying to kill them, and they just called the cops. You know, if you're out there camping on the lake and your headlight gets shot out and 2 stray bullets strike the side of your camper, you're probably gonna freak out. I mean, if I had my family with me, I would definitely call the police, so this isn't that crazy to me. The report of the elk abduction in Washington was made by the National UFO Reporting Center after allegedly speaking to the workers. And I have issues with several parts of this story. First, the interviewed workers, of which there are only 3, claimed that the duration of the entire event was around 3 to 5 minutes. There were 14 workers total. 3 to 5 minutes is a long time for something so crazy to be happening in the sky. Why are there not more witnesses? Okay, maybe they were so scared, right? They were so scared by the shouting of their 3 coworkers that they moved in the opposite direction. They never looked. Or maybe they saw the fleeing elk and thought that a predator was nearby, and so they were too busy looking for the predator, they never looked up. Or maybe by the time they did look, the craft was just too far away and they weren't scanning the horizon. I don't know, man. I don't buy it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Secondly, this case was our introduction to the correlation with CWD, and without it, the disappearances in Wyoming have a much weaker connection to CWD. The claim that the recovered elk had CWD was made by the UFO Reporting Center as well. But as of the filming of this video, there hasn't even been 1 case of chronic wasting disease in the state of Washington. Now, I don't want to be so proud as to suggest that I know for a fact that these people are lying. I'm not going to accuse them of that. I don't really like to accuse anyone without some sort of concrete evidence, because I don't want to look like an idiot, right? But what I do know is that it would be pretty stinking remarkable if these aliens had found the only deer in Washington state to ever get chronic wasting disease in the last 80 years, and they pick it up and then they just drop it off in the woods. Like, the deer's carcass can spread CWD. So why would they do that? And if there was a deer carcass in Washington with CWD, why are there no cases of CWD in Washington today? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, finally, we move on to the Carl Higdon story. From what I can gather, his story never changed from the time that he first told it to the time that he passed away in 2022. Now, that doesn't mean that he was telling the truth, of course. Here's an alleged image of the bullet that struck the force field. Carl also claims that he had tuberculosis scars on his lungs before he went up into the UFOs. Doctors couldn't find them after he was examined. Now, that would be pretty crazy, right? I haven't been able to independently verify that. So let me know in the comments if you have a source, because, you know, that would go a long way towards providing credibility. My goal is to provide you with as much information as possible while being as entertaining as possible.
Are you not entertained?
But we need to remember that these are real cases involving real people, and the sense of loss that the grieving families feel for their loved ones is also very, very real. I was made aware of this topic by the documentary series Missing 411, which is also the namesake of this video. So, if you liked this video and you want to dive deeper into the subject, go show that documentary some love. It's very well made, and it deserves your attention. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Stuff like that really helps the channel. My name is Chris, and thank you for watching UFOlogy.